Good morning, good afternoon, and good day to all of you who have gathered with us across the many different time zones today. My name is Thomas Garrett, and I'm the Secretary General of the Community of Democracies. And I want to welcome you to this discussion on enabling democratic governance through technology. Today, we will speak to the importance of multilateral mechanisms to exchange best practices and ideas on new technology. And then we'll move into a roundtable discussion of how we can use technology to improve government services and to increase citizen participation in democracy. I want to express my appreciation to the U.S. Department of State and to the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor for their support to the Community of Democracies and their generous funding of today's event. We're very privileged to begin our program with two high-level presentations from His Excellency Bodan Aurescu, the Foreign Minister of Romania, and His Excellency Lashe Darsalia, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Georgia. And so to begin our program, I would like to invite His Excellency, Foreign Minister Aurescu, to present his opening remarks. Excellency, please.
Mr. Secretary General, distinguished participants, it is with great pleasure that I have accepted the invitation to participate in today's discussion as Presidency of the Community of Democracies. Upholding and advancing democracy in the digital era is one of the most topical challenges, one that we must turn to our advantage by harnessing the role and input of technology to improve and support a democratic governance. The relation between the democratic process and artificial intelligence is one of the priorities of the Romanian presidency of the Community of Democracies, and we have touched upon this topic during the Governing Council in February, hosted in Bucharest this year. I am pleased to welcome today among us Mr. Tomislav Tileman, who was also present at our Governing Council meeting in Bucharest. And I recall that he most eloquently pointed out that nations are relying on institutions designed in the 19th century and technology designed in the 20th century to solve the problems of the 21st century. Indeed, this is something we must acknowledge and fix. I'm also pleased that representatives from civil society, private sector, and other partner organizations will also share their perspectives on the topic during this event. The Romanian presidency of the Community of Democracies welcomes the creation of the new working group on democracy and technology, co-chaired by our esteemed colleagues from Georgia, and we wish them great success in fostering collaboration around the development and use of digital public goods that will support democracy and democratic institutions. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to share with you Romania's experience on digital transformation. With almost 6% of the Romanian GDP, this is an important driver of growth and innovation. Our strategy relies on four pillars. The first one focuses on increasing transparency, efficiency, and accountability in the national public administration. The second one is looking at increasing the interoperability of all IT systems. The third one is about integrating at national level the use of electronic identification, the EID. And the last one focuses on creating a portal allowing service providers to get the information they need and complete administrative procedures online. We trust the digitalization of this sector will make our country less bureaucratic, more resilient, and more attractive to foreign and national investments. It will also increase citizen satisfaction with public services, which will further consolidate the social contract that our democracy is based upon. Romania often takes pride in its internet speed, being among the fastest in the European Union. We see digitalization as an opportunity for everyone, and we believe in an open, free, and secure internet. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Romania experienced a significant increase in the use of digital services, mostly in education, through online classes for students and pupils, in e-commerce, as well as in online medical and public administration services. For instance, several Romanian companies have developed a program called I Want Online, supporting companies and stores affected by the pandemic to relaunch their activity online. It provides free training, support on online services such as establishing an online store, digital marketing, automated order processing, e-billing, and other e-commerce services. We were glad to see that during the pandemic, 500 volunteers of the Code for Romania community developed 6 platforms to help individuals and communities respond to various challenges related to COVID-19. It proved to be a force multiplier for both the civil society and the public administration. Distinguished participants, the unprecedented challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic have also tested the core democratic concepts and institutions on which our societies are built upon. The COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the importance of the various facets of digital technology, where inclusivity and accessibility to ensure a chance for everyone or to leave no one behind remain key elements. It also demonstrated the pivotal need for access to reliable, accurate, and trustworthy information, and confirmed the role of free, independent, accountable, and pluralistic media in strengthening transparency, accountability, and trust within the society. The Bucharest Declaration, adopted at the 20th anniversary of the Community of Democracies, hosted by Romania on 26th of June this year, enshrined these issues, stating that, I quote, "Public access to information is crucial during crisis, including that internet access is essential to ensuring that information reaches those affected by the virus." End of quote. Technology brings the world closer, but it also comes with new risks. Thus, we face new challenges brought by the rapid technological development, such as ensuring cybersecurity, privacy rights, and data protection. We need to further evaluate the social impact and implications of new and emerging technologies on governance, on politics, public administration, and policy making. We must also evaluate the future prospects of digital democracy and its transformative potential for increasing public engagement and community empowerment by maintaining digital technologies, including artificial intelligence, as human-centered. It is thus of paramount importance to ensure offline and online promotion and protection of human rights, democracy, good governance, and the rule of law. Digital cooperation at global level is essential to achieve our goals and can play an important role in mobilizing all actors to ensure open, secure, and affordable access to digital infrastructure for all. Dear participants, democracy demands a constantly evolving system. Multilateral institutions, civil society, tech companies, platform providers, business and experts can share analyses and best practices and set standards where appropriate on how to enforce human rights frameworks and support democracy in the digital age. As digital technology holds a more central role of every aspect of people's lives, we should be able to trust it. As I have already mentioned, fake news, disinformation, and confusion are more present than ever in our societies against the background of the current crisis. Positive digital democracy can be enhanced through exchange of best practices and lessons learned on countering online disinformation, developing self-regulatory approaches when it comes to social media, by being more proactive on developing accountability and transparency standards. Dear friends, the Romanian presidency of the Community of Democracies will continue the series of events on countering malign foreign interference in democracies launched 1 year ago that will address some of the interrelated issues I referred to. This October, we intend to organize a global virtual conference dedicated to the same topic. If there is one lesson learned to take away from the current health crisis, it is the paramount importance of digitalization and multilateral cooperation. In light of the above, I wish the Community of Democracies every success in the promotion of the digital democracy worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you, Foreign Minister Orescu, for that very superb beginning to our discussion. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Romania for its service as presidency of the Community of Democracies. And now it's my honor to ask His Excellency Lashid Arsalia of Georgia to speak.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Secretary General Gareth, Minister Aurescu, Excellencies. I'm glad to be part of this important event, which gives us as an excellent opportunity to discuss the correlation between democracy and new technologies, with a particular focus on use of the digital technology to strengthen democratic governance. At the same time, it is my pleasure to announce the launch of a new working group on democracy and technology chaired by Georgia. We highly value acknowledgement of Georgia's success towards democratic path and the proposal for chairmanship of this new initiative. The Community of Democracies Working Group on Democracy and Technology is an informal multilateral initiative for the joint discussion aimed at harnessing digital technology to support effective and accountable democratic governance worldwide. The purpose of this voluntary forum is to enhance the dialogue on how technology could empower democracy. We believe that coalition's work will be successful only if it keeps pace with ongoing developments, including in the field of modern technologies. In today's world, democratic governance is facing major challenges which require increasing the benefits of digital technology in line with minimizing its threats to open societies. Moreover, the current pandemic puts democratic governance under extraordinary circumstances. Having said that, I believe the launching of this new working group is very timely, which can play a very important role to join our efforts in pursuit of common goal of advancing and protecting democratic freedoms and supporting consolidation of democratic values around the globe, full of new opportunities as well as challenges. New working group will foster collaboration around the development and use of digital public goods and open source tools that support democracy and democratic institutions. At the same time, we intend to devote a particular focus to the issue of cybersecurity, which is an important safeguard to use digital public goods and in general ensure democratic governance systems. Moreover, I believe the working group should complement the important work being carried out by different institutions with regard to good governance and sustainable development initiative at multilateral level. A critical aspect of this working group will be the active inclusion of civil society, international organizations, and the private sector working in the field of technology. A strong civil society is one of the pillars of democratic governance. Knowledge sharing in the areas of implementation, multi-stakeholder assessment of solution for democratic governance, platform governance, procurement transparency, and corruption control should be seen as the key elements for effectiveness, accountability, and inclusiveness of public institutions to overcome the current challenges. By taking part in this initiative, we look forward to discuss and share valuable knowledge, experiences, and best practices, as well as coordinate the work in the field of digital technology aimed at promoting and protecting human rights, democratic values, and providing solutions to strengthen democratic governance as established in the Warsaw Declaration and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Moreover, we consider the working group as providing additional opportunity to find technological solutions that support democracy and further implementation of sustainable development goals. We believe the SDG 16 is a key in guiding our efforts towards peaceful societies and for the success of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that can only be achieved with the commitment of the integrated societies and well-functional, transparent, strong institutions. Excellencies, in conclusion, let me underline that as the chair of working group, we will continue striving to promote fundamental goals, including but not limited to sustainable development, security, and social justice, based on the respect for the universal human rights and human dignity, good governance, the rule of law, independent democratic institutions, and open consultations with civil society. On this path, we look forward to the joint collaboration in promoting initiatives aimed at safeguarding digital democracy, human rights, and government transparency, and encourage other members of the community of democracy to engage in the new working group. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Foreign Minister, for those remarks. And I also want to thank Georgia for taking the leadership of chairing this new working group. We're quite excited about its opportunities. So now I'd like to take just a moment to briefly introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Tamika Tilleman. Dr. Tilleman is the Executive Director of the Digital Impact and Governance Initiative, or DIGI, which is located at the think tank New America. With the support of the Rockefeller Foundation, DIGI is developing the next generation of technology platforms meant to transform the way governments deliver value for their citizens. Dr. Tilleman's past includes service at the State Department as Senior Advisor to the Secretary of State, where he led a team of experts that brought together technology, talent, resources, and partners to build 20 major initiatives in 55 countries. Dr. Tilleman also led the State Department's Global Philanthropy Working Group and its Federal Advisory Committee on Engagement with Non-State Actors. In addition to his work in the executive branch of the U.S. government, Dr. Tilleman spent 4 years on the congressional staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he worked with Senators Joe Biden Senator John Kerry, and Senator Barack Obama. He's a member of the World Economic Forum's Council for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, of the United Nations World Food Program Innovation Advisory Council, and he serves on the Lantos Foundation Board of Trustees. Dr. Tillman, thank you very much for being with us today, and please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Secretary General, for that generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Minister Arescu for Romania's strong leadership of the community of democracies, and also congratulate Georgia and Deputy Minister Darsalia for Georgia's leadership of this very important new working group. If I can ask the Secretariat to please put up my slides. We are here today for a simple and important reason already mentioned by Foreign Minister Arescu, which is that around the world, in too many cases, democracies are relying on institutions designed in the 19th century and technology from the 20th century to try and solve the problems of today. And frankly, the results of this are predictable and unfortunate. In the United States, my country, our Treasury Department, by their own admission, makes $144 billion of improper payments each year. In most instances, this is not a result of corruption. It's simply that the systems don't work the way they should. Globally, the costs are even more severe. We lose $3.6 trillion to corruption, and tax evasion costs $3.1 trillion worldwide. If you put this together, it is enough funding to cover the entirety of the gap for the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have the opportunity, theoretically, in principle, to bring greater transparency and accountability to these systems, and in doing so, cover every challenge, have enough resources to cover every challenge, from eradicating poverty to addressing climate change. It is difficult to overstate the magnitude of this opportunity. We also have extensive data that affirms the thesis that we need to work to modernize our institutions. Several years ago, the World Economic Forum conducted a comprehensive analysis of data from the United Nations, the World Bank, and the OECD. And the bottom line they found in trying to determine why some societies succeed and others fail is that if you want to predict the prosperity of a country, all you have to do is look at its institutions. So there is an urgent need for democracies to modernize the structures of government that in too many instances are stuck in the past. The second consideration we have is that authoritarian governments are moving forward and moving forward rapidly. They're deploying systems that will enable them to know more about every individual than governments in the past could have known about any individual. And the surveillance technology that underlies these efforts is being exported throughout the world through a variety of different trade and commercial initiatives. Democracies have, of course, raised concerns about this challenge coming from authoritarian governments and their fusion of technology, data, and the institutions of power. What they have not done as effectively as they need to is offer a compelling alternative. The only solutions that we have available in many democracies today revolve around very large centralized technology companies that in many instances pose their own grave risks to democratic governance and accountability. There is, however, an opportunity emerging, and it is the opportunity that unites us today. It is found in a new generation of digital government platforms that are delivering dramatic improvements in accountability and efficiency of democratic institutions. We are seeing this, as the foreign minister alluded, in the response to the pandemic. Without question, the governments that have delivered the most effective responses to this crisis power their institutions with next-generation digital architecture. And we are seeing that the ability of governments to use digital platforms to channel resources, talent, and information effectively is instrumental in their resilience in this moment of global need. Several years ago, we brought together a team of leading experts to develop a blueprint for what a digital stack for democracies could involve. As the minister suggested, there are a few foundational layers of that technology. You need good systems for digital identity. You need mechanisms for exchanging data. You need systems for facilitating payments and the movements of resources accountably. And then a whole series of different solutions can plug into that foundational infrastructure. Solutions for tax and finance, public benefits, asset tracking, civic registries, civic participation, and procurement can all work together to help governments operate in the way citizens really should expect of 21st century institutions. We at New America and my team within the Digital Impact and Governance Initiative are working to build many of these systems now, collaborating with partners around the world to deploy systems for jobs and social benefits, taxation and public finance, land titling, citizen data wallets, and revenue management. There's more work to be done on this front, and we are eager to collaborate with many of you to make that happen. So how can the community of democracies and this new working group that we have explored today take up this cause? First, with projects. It is going to be critical to find governments around the world that are willing to partner with civil society and technical actors to develop open source solutions to these challenges. To the extent these solutions are open sourced and designed in a way that makes them freely available to other governments, it will be simpler and easier to share these solutions and adapt them to meet local needs. Our goal in many instances should be to design 80% solutions that hardwire in accountability, transparency, and efficiency, and then enable each local community to customize the last 20% of these solutions to meet their needs. Next, we should work to develop principles that define best practices for responsible use of technology and give citizens greater ownership of their data. It is going to be critical going forward as we deploy these systems that we do so in a way that will enable trust of the citizens that we are hoping to serve. Doing so will require extensive collaboration with civil society. It will demand multi-stakeholder oversight of these efforts, and we will have to ensure that citizens are the primary beneficiaries of these solutions as we create them. Finally, we will need new partnerships. We will need new models for leveraging philanthropic capital, de-risk the development of this new generation of digital public goods, and we will need to make these tools available to countries in the global north and the global south. This is an opportunity and a challenge that transcends traditional categorizations of democracy and traditional categorizations of development. It will be important to governments around the world. 2020 has been a very challenging year. It is no secret to say that at this point. But to the extent we can come together and unite in addressing this challenge, we will be successful in turning the tide and providing a new generation of solutions that enable our institutions to meet the challenges we face around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tillerman. Those were very inspiring words, and I think they were the perfect introduction to our panel. Our panel today is going to be moderated by Mr. Scott Busby, who is the Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the U.S. Department of State. In addition to his many years of service in this very important part of the State Department, he has served as Director for Human Rights on the National Security Council at the White House. And Mr. Busby was also coordinator of the intergovernmental consultations on migration, asylum, and refugees in Geneva. Other important positions in his background include being Director of the Office of Policy and Resource Planning at the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. He was Director for Multilateral and Humanitarian Affairs at the National Security Council under President Bill Clinton. He was also counsel at the Immigration and Naturalization Service and the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Busby, thank you for being here today, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to the community of democracies for organizing this important event. I also want to thank the community of democracies president, Romania, and the Republic of Georgia for agreeing to chair our new Democracy and Technology Working Group. Let me now turn to the panel. We have three excellent panelists today. The first is Paulina Ibarra, who is the executive director of Fundación Multitudes and is also the coordinator of the civil society network involved in the community of democracies. The next panelist is Jason Pielmeyer, a policy director with the Global Network Initiative and also a former State Department employee working on these issues. And lastly, we have Dr. Chi-Ming Peng, founder and CEO of Weather Risk Explore Incorporated, which is based in Taiwan. And I would note that Dr. Peng has been integrally involved in Taiwan's development of an open government action plan. So we're looking very much forward to hearing about that. For those of you not aware of what Taiwan is doing on these issues, Taiwan is really on the cutting edge of many issues relating to democracy and technology. So we look forward to your remarks, Dr. Peng. Let me begin by asking Paulina a question. Paulina, we know that democratic governance is more effective where there is inclusive participation. Those affected by public policy should, of course, be consulted and provide feedback on them. What, in your view, are the basic ingredients needed to facilitate productive collaboration between civil society, government, the private sector, and others on the use of digital technology to improve democratic governance? Paulina?
Good morning. Hi, Scott. It's good to see you and see some of you participating here this morning. First, let me thank the State Department for its generous contribution to supporting the event, and also the Presidency of Romania for really pushing to discuss these particular issues. And of course, to the Community of Democracies and the Permanent Secretariat for planning and inviting me to join the event this morning. The question that you make is actually extremely timely and important, as Dr. Tillman also mentioned. In the digital age, technology and the internet have revolutionized every aspect of life, including how we vote, how we demand accountability from those who democratically represent us, learn and socialize. However, and unfortunately, as we have seen in the past months, due to this pandemic, too many are left behind, marginalized, and shut out because they do not have access to digital technology, computers, tablets, smartphones, internet. As a matter of fact, I'm one of those people. So I currently live in the middle of nowhere in the country, and it's very difficult to get a good connection to talk to you this morning. So there are multiple reasons for why this is happening, including social, economic, geographic, or political reasons. And specifically, in the case of the current global pandemic, do we know what is the impact of the digital divide, for example, in Latin America, my region, where public health recommendations such as social distancing and self-isolation make virtual conversation almost the new normal, if not the real normal? In Latin America and the Caribbean, the digital divide is especially troubling, and the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated it and highlights why assessing and understanding the underlying issues and challenges of this divide are more important than ever. Forgive me, I don't want to make this about Latin America. This is a real challenge globally. However, I want you to share with you a few statistics. 45% of Latin Americans do not have access to services related to digital connectivity, such as medicine, education, online government, and electronic banking, which are basic services. Only 4 out of 10 households have a fixed broadband connection, and individual mobile internet access does not exceed 50%. So, can we talk about technology tools to improve and enable democratic governance without building solid policy to reduce the huge gap that exists today on digital access? I believe that first it's really important to contextualize the use of technology. Consider this. In a digital environment that grows day by day, the use of digital tools have been established as a fundamental basis for the relationship between stakeholders, home, work-related, commercial exchanges, etc. Everything is related to technology and digital access. However, it is like building a house without the blueprint. So we should ask ourselves if the existence and development of technologies is sufficient to facilitate the relationship processes between all the actors of society. Given this, it is essential to note that the digital tools serve to facilitate processes, but we must use them in an intentional and planned way, specifically when we refer to exchanges between citizens and governments. Given this, when considering governments, actors, and as facilitators of the relationship processes between different actors, we have to be aware of a few things. Bear with me, please, because I don't have the recipe, but I do have some ingredients in my pantry to come up with something. Considering the barrier to access, the huge gap divide, the generation of policies that promote greater access and democratization of technologies should be considered, especially in disadvantaged sectors, for example, rural areas. We should all continuously work on taking action to reduce the digital divide and increase digital literacy. While a large part of the world population uses technology every day, it is necessary to constantly seek the updating of knowledge and skills from citizens as well as public officials. We must work on rescuing best practices from private sector and civil society in the use of technologies to solve complex problems, such as, for example, the access to connectivity. So why don't we use what is already in place to develop a benchmark that can generate improvement on the access and the relationship between technology and citizens? On the other hand, civil society and the private sector must act in awareness of the methodological differences that exist between different types of users when it comes to technology. There are several examples where companies have developed technological solutions that provide innovation to problems that governments have not been able to resolve, hence making the collaboration between the public and the private sector essential to resolve the problems of the digital divide. And to include in this relationship key elements of open government, such as transparency, collaboration, and co-creation, sound accountability mechanisms, and innovation in the use of technologies that at one point will enable citizens to participate of democratic governance. I hope that in part answers your question, Scott.
Yes, it does, Paulina. Thank you very much. One more question for you, Paulina. At what point should the people affected by technological innovation be able to weigh in on that technology for governance purposes, whether it's facial recognition, contact tracing applications, or new applications of artificial intelligence or blockchain? Is it at the point of design, implementation, or both?
I think it's all. These issues are highly relevant for citizens and governments nowadays because they fully and deeply relate to people's lives in a much more intense and profound way than any other technology issues because they're personal. However, they are dependent and related on something fundamental for its use, which is the criteria of those who operate them. For the use of these tools, citizen consent must always be considered, and how we achieve that consent is most likely the real challenge. And to make matters worse, for citizens, this is the real issue, since we are, as people, on one hand, very much driven to communicate all that happens around us and with us, but when it comes to how that information is managed by the government, we do have a real issue: reluctance to provide that data. So how can we move forward on assuring that through the use of algorithms, we are not in violation of a fundamental right? I believe that these technological tools have such a potential if both the limits of the use and the ends are not very well defined in a cost-cutting way, which it could be a time bomb that generates more conflict. So just let me pose a question here. which is very much the conversation I'm having with several senators and ministers in Chile, the country where I'm from, as we are very much into the discussion of the data protection bill in the Senate. Who owns the data that fits into that data algorithm and machine learning to help produce democratic and inclusive policy? I do. The person or the computer that stores it, the public official that collected it. Currently, the opening of government processes to citizens.
Uh-oh, looks like we may have lost Paulina. Paulina, are you still there? I guess the bandwidth challenges have gotten the better of Paulina.
And I think yes. Let me stop video. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Apologies for that. As I explained, I'm in a very rural area. So as I was saying, it is key to include transparency in the algorithms, hopefully with an ethical framework in place and accountability mechanisms so citizens can learn and understand how this data is used and with what purpose. This is why it's so important that topics as relevant as artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and others are developed both in their design as well as in their implementation, hand in hand with the citizens, which can only generate positive things. On the one hand, citizen participation and collaboration can reduce costs, generating assertive actions that can make the implementation process something well evaluated. In addition to this, considering the high interest from citizens on how governments use artificial intelligence, it is necessary to enable citizens to provide self-feedback in order to be able to replicate or even improve the process if required. And in this part, adaptability and inclusion are key elements to consider. So the most important task at hand should be identifying the proper participation channels that citizens could use to promote a virtuous relationship between the different actors to generate value in the development of algorithm or any other digital tools. So as you can see, Scott, we believe that not only is important the when, but the how we get those citizens involved.
Great, Paulina. That's very, very useful and interesting. Thank you for those interventions. I now want to turn to Jason Pielmeyer, who's going to talk about the role of the private sector. Jason, the private sector and specifically technology companies, which are part of the Global Network Initiative, have a large role in developing and maintaining the technology that all sectors of society rely on to operate, including the public sector. What are the key issues that the private sector faces with respect to facilitating interaction between governments and their constituents?
Thanks, Scott. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I want to echo my co-panelists' thanks to all of the folks who have worked hard to put this event together, and I'm very excited to participate and also to hopefully see the fruits of this working group going forward. The information and communication technology companies that provide everything from the backbone to the services and platforms that we use on a daily basis do a range of things to provide valuable services that enable and expand users' ability to access information, communicate with each other, organize themselves into groups based on affinity, interests, and political views. These companies provide these services through a variety of business models, including advertising-supported free services, subscriptions, and fee-for-service models. Some of them are designed specifically to facilitate interaction between governments and their constituents. As Tamika talked about, this is a growing and burgeoning area of technology development. Many more, however, are designed for broader purposes and yet have been adopted and used for these same purposes. Regardless of sort of their design and their business model, all of these services can face certain, I think, common issues or challenges that are worth just talking about briefly. The first is the issue of availability. Paulina talked about that to some extent, and I think she's much better positioned to have articulated the challenges in particular related to access. And I think it's important to note that in addition to having access to these services, which is an issue both of infrastructure and affordability, we then have other issues of digital literacy, which can affect the ability of users to actually fully appreciate and take advantage of digital services. So this covers issues that range from the availability of content in local languages to the sophistication and know-how of users in terms of how they interact, such that they don't remain simply as passive recipients of information, but are actively engaged with others and with the services themselves. There are also availability issues related to integrity and interoperability of the services. So governments can play an important role there, making sure that users can migrate freely between different services, that there is equal access to services, especially for those who have limited economic security. And then finally, there's the issue of intentional disruptions to services, and this gets into the topic of censorship. And we see in, unfortunately, an increasing number of countries around the world, governments actually affirmatively shutting down internet access, especially in times of protest, in and around elections, and in other situations where the value of these information technologies is especially important. These issues of availability, as Paulina mentioned, have been critical, and I think their value has been underscored. The value of these services has been underscored during the pandemic. When people have shifted to online services to be able to supplement and in some places completely replace access to education, access to healthcare information, and other important content. In addition to availability, I think it's also true to say that all of the services that can be used to facilitate citizen government interaction face security challenges. In addition to the cybersecurity issues, which is not my area of expertise, there are a range of freedom of expression concerns that I think are fair to characterize as security related. And in particular, this goes to the issue of misinformation and disinformation and manipulation of online spaces and digital information. It's important to underscore that the freedom of expression is not just about the ability of individuals to articulate themselves, but also includes the freedom of opinion and the right to access information, including relevant government information. And so in this regard, it's really important that governments and other stakeholders around the world are working to ensure that the information that's available through digital services is credible, that it is reliable, and that individuals have trust ultimately in what they are seeing on these services and their ability to engage with those services. And lastly, there are issues related to privacy. These have been, I think, well articulated and understood for some time, but are nevertheless worth underscoring. In particular, as we've seen governments around the world increasingly interested in regulating content online, and at GNI, we've been doing a lot of work on this recently. We think there is room for positive regulation on the part of governments, whether that's through new laws or amendments or interpretations of existing laws. But it is critical that when doing this and addressing the many legitimate challenges that are in front of us, we nevertheless appreciate and protect the right to privacy, because it is that right that ultimately provides users with the assurance that they need to feel confident interacting with others, as well as including with their government. And here it's really important to underscore the importance of anonymity and pseudonymity, in particular for vulnerable groups, including journalists and human rights defenders. And the issue of encryption here also plays a very important role in making sure that individuals feel that their user data is secure, that their content and communications will be kept private. And so it's important that governments really appreciate these issues and understand how efforts to address content regulation can impact them. So I'll stop there and happy to dive into any of that in more detail if it would be of interest.
Thanks, Jason. One question. Are there best practices or models of public-private partnership that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of experimentation and a lot of good practice that's developed in this space. The Freedom Online Coalition is an initiative that I know, Scott, you're quite familiar with, and others in this session maybe as well. The FOC, as it's known, is a multilateral initiative that brings together 32 governments committed to protecting human rights in the digital age. Several years ago, when I was at the State Department working with Scott, we were a part of an effort to amend the terms of reference of the FOC in order to create an advisory network, which is composed of representatives from leading technology companies, civil society organizations, and academics, and really build that advisory network into the FOC work streams such that it can provide effective guidance and insight and really leverage the expertise and diversity of views that it facilitates. So I think that's a step in the right direction, and the FOC is clearly focused on these issues around technology and governance. That same model, the advisory network model, has also been adopted by the Christchurch Call, which is a public-private initiative spearheaded by the governments of New Zealand and France and focused on the threat of terrorist and violent extremist content online, so-called TVEC. I'm privileged to be on both of those advisory networks for the Freedom Online Coalition and the Christchurch Call, and can speak to the fact that they, I think, bring a lot of really important voices to the table. That's not without its challenges, both in terms of organizing, everything from conference calls across 12 different time zones, and as well as, of course, the differences of views that can sometimes be challenging to reconcile. But in both of those experiences, I think those challenges have been surmountable, and the resulting benefits have been, I think, quite significant. Just a couple other things to mention, Scott. The Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, GIFCT, is an interesting example of an initiative that was actually established by a group of large tech companies working together to address TVEC, and it has since created its own advisory committee, which invites governments as well as civil society representatives to have a role in both giving advice to the GIFCT as well as creating or in theory providing a level of accountability. All of these initiatives are public-private in the sense that they have both governments and the private sector involved. And I think they all do some good work to build trust in the use of technology. However, I would say they all have room for improvement when it comes to fostering transparency and accountability. And on that point, I think the Global Network Initiative, GNI, where I work, has some valuable lessons to learn. GNI brings together tech companies, civil society organizations, academics, and investors from around the world. It doesn't involve governments, but we nevertheless bring these diverse stakeholders together and provide a unique accountability mechanism that allows our non-company members to assess the efforts of our company members to implement a set of shared principles and implementation guidelines around freedom of expression and privacy in the digital space. That assessment is based on access, which is brokered by GNI, to sensitive internal company information, including around key case studies. That's information that can't be made public for a variety of different reasons, but that we have nevertheless been able to facilitate access to in order to get a really good sense of how companies are dealing with challenges around freedom of expression and privacy. And I think that kind of model, that multi-stakeholder model that creates a shared space based on trust and confidentiality, is one that governments around the world could learn from as they seek to enhance transparency and accountability for tech platforms. So happy to talk more about any of that if it'll be useful, but otherwise I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jason. Let me turn now to Dr. Peng. Dr. Peng, Taiwan is a leading example of what can be achieved when government officials and citizens collaborate to identify and solve problems using digital technology. We understand that you are involved with developing Taiwan's Open Government Action Plan, which includes several components focused on the effective use of technology. First, can you tell us how you became involved in that initiative and what has been your experience working along Taiwan's experts?
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, when we talk about the democratic governance through technology, the open data and the data governance is very important. And Taiwan is the most open country in Asia. We open more than 45,000 data sets in Asia. It's the most data sets in Asia. And however, it's a long story. We started the open data policy in year 2013. And however, it's very slow. And however, in 2014, because Taiwan and China, our ruling party during that time, they want to sign the cross-strait service trade agreement. And however, during that years, lots of the young students occupied our Congress, our Parliament office. And we say it's a sunflower moment. And the students declare the ruling party's lawmakers had violated legislative procedures. They think the agreement is just like a black box. So the government, the ruling party during that time, they also lose the local government elections. Later on, they changed the government. The new minister claimed, and we shall use the big data, open data, and crowdsourcing as the government we shall do. And so that year, I remember lots of the young generation, they can use the data governance, data science, and all visualization tools to help the government, especially they educate the minister how to use the new tool to help the democratic system to work. And although the government, the ruling government, they also lose the election, the presidential election that year, later on next year. And it's very successful story because later on, lots of the young generation, they become the minister to our new government. And so lots of the young generation also become the parliament. That's the story that Taiwan has started to use data governance. And right now, our ecosystem, we can say there were three factors. One is open data. And we still keep working with government, especially our government. Each minister, we have an organization, a committee. The private sector, the civil society, they can talk with the government official for each minister. We want to get the data we want. So right now, the open by default, free by default is our policy. And later on, we have a lot of data scientists, a lot of young generation, they can use the data very free, especially to help the government about transparency, efficiency, and innovations. So right now, we have lots of young generation, they can use the data to get a new job and also entrepreneurship. And also our president Ho, and they have a presidential hackathon in recent year, and they encourage the emphasis on the open source data utilization, and the practice innovation to address the needs of the country in social innovations. So lots of the data exchangement about from the private sector with the government, they work together. So right now we have a very good ecosystem about the government and the private sector. And recently we also in Taiwan want to join the OGP, Open Government Partnership. So we organize Open Government Action Plan team. And later on, our parliament also found that is a good issue. So we also have an open parliament action team. So in the private sector, the civil society work with government, also the parliament, to want to write down the Taiwan open data and data governance action plan. That's our ecosystem. Recently, I think this is a good model in Asia from the private sector or civil society to help the government. Yeah, that's my talk.
Thank you, Dr. Peng. We're running a little bit behind schedule, so I want to turn now to two representatives of the CD youth group. The first is Ioana Daspinescu, from Romania, and the second is Brian Griffin from the United States. Ioana, please go ahead and ask your question of the panel.
Good afternoon and hello from Bucharest. It is a pleasure to be here today. A lot of thanks to the Permanent Secretariat of the Community of Democracies. I will go on now with my questions. The first one is, what steps can and should social media companies follow in order to ensure that democracy isn't compromised? And on that note, how much should governments get involved in order to ensure that the private sector does not interfere in the democratic process? Also, I have a second question, if that is all right with the moderator. My second question is, should big tech companies be responsible of regulating the interactions between users on their platforms?
Thank you, Ioana. Who on the panel would like to address either of those questions?
Scott, I'm happy to take a first crack at that. I think G&I does a lot of work in this space. As I mentioned, we have actually just completed a review of about 15 different initiatives from around the world that aim to regulate what we call content regulation efforts. So efforts that are meant to address digital harms through either new laws or regulations. I think, Ioana, your questions are excellent ones. I think this is really the key challenge when it comes to technology governance at the moment. Governments for many years, I think, had a relatively hands-off approach. It's not to say there haven't been regulations in place. That's a myth that I think many of us have fallen for. But the active sort of degree to which governments have actively been seeking to change and revise the way technology is handled and challenges respecting user-generated content on social media platforms is certainly a trend that we can't ignore. And so at G&I, after sort of looking at all of these different initiatives from around the world through the lens of international human rights law, we have produced a policy brief will be coming out in the next couple of weeks that tries to give some guidance to governments that are seeking to implement content regulation measures. And I won't go into all of what we talk about in the brief, but I will say that I think there is a lot of room for governments to provide greater clarity and predictability to the private sector, a lot of room for the private sector to provide enhanced transparency and build better trust with their users, and a lot of room for all of us collectively to work towards ensuring better accountability on the part of all of the actors in the digital ecosystem. So I'm optimistic that if governments start from sort of fundamental rule of law and democratic principles in terms of considering new efforts openly, inviting wide participation, including from experts in different constituencies, if lawmaking and regulation is evidence-based, and if we all act with a degree of humility, recognizing that technology changes rapidly and the challenges that we face via technology are unpredictable, we can come up with approaches that will be different from what we have done so far, but nevertheless will protect and ideally enhance human rights online. So I think there's a lot of room for discussion about exactly what that looks like. As you probably know, there are a number of initiatives underway in Europe as well as in other countries, including at the EU level through the Digital Services Act. And at G&I, we've been actively engaged in those efforts and will continue to be.
Great, Jason, thank you. Let me turn now to Brian. Brian, your question, please.
Hello, and thank you all for your commentary to this point, and thank you to the Community of Democracies for hosting this important event. My name is Brian Griffin. I'm speaking to you from Tampa, Florida. Participatory governance was the topic of my master's thesis project at Columbia University. I spoke with citizens who lived in rural parts of Cambodia who were eager to engage their parliamentary representatives, but often lived in a village so remote they had no means by which to do so. How can technology infrastructures be built and adapted to bring more rural citizens into participatory governance around the world?
So, Scott, if I may.
Go
and
ahead,
if you-
Paulina. Yes.
That's exactly the issue at hand that I was trying to express and present previously. I think that before we go into including more citizens into democratic governance, whatever that is, we must first look into sound policy making in order to have and to provide those citizens with the proper access that they need. And not only the proper access, but as Jason also mentioned, the literacy process that is involved on providing those resources for citizens is not so easy. And I mean, and there are multiple forms, but I feel that during this pandemic, we have seen a real need to strengthen specifically those type of resources and to have work, to have government along with private sector work closely in order to provide access to the connectivity right. Right now, it's a fundamental right that should be considered by all governments and private sector in order to move forward into much stronger tools for democratic governance.
Thanks, Paulina. I'd like to give Dr. Peng a chance to respond to any of the questions posed by the youth leaders. Dr. Peng?
Yeah, the ecosystem is not an easy job. We should have, especially we have the policy. The policy should have some rule and go guideline or very good example for the data governance. So the policy is very important, and it should be public-private partnership. That is not easy because lots of the government, they want to control lots of the data, control lots of the policy. So private sector should be just like a volunteer to educate the government official and also go into the government. For example, in Taiwan, we have one minister. They come from the civil society. He understands the private sector, what they think. So it's a very good key point to link with the private sector with government. That's my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peng. We're a bit over schedule. So Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you for the final words. Tom?
Thank you, Scott. That was a fascinating panel. I'm sure we could have gone much longer, and I hope to revisit these topics again. So let me just say in closing, thank you to our distinguished speakers and participants today. This conversation we had around the use of digital technology and innovation that supports democratic governance is going to be very helpful in guiding the work of this newly established COD working group on democracy and technology. I want to thank this panel and those who joined the discussion from all around the world. We look forward at the Secretariat to hosting you for another discussion on issues of democracy soon. And until that time, the Secretariat team and I here in Warsaw encourage you all, hope you all will stay safe and stay united. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks to all who participated today, especially the panelists. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.